His room was perfect until he met his alien vampire roommates. Alex had spent weeks looking for the perfect place to live. After years of bouncing between crowded dorms and short-term rentals, he was ready for something more permanent. The apartment he found was everything he had dreamed of, a spacious, modern one-bedroom with large windows that allowed sunlight to flood the room. The minimalist design was exactly what he liked. Clean lines, simple furniture, and no unnecessary clutter. It was his little sanctuary, a place where he could finally relax, study, and feel at peace. On the day he moved in, the place was still empty, save for the basic furniture and a few boxes of his belongings. He took his time unpacking, carefully arranging his things just the way he liked. Books lined the shelves, a small desk sat by the window, and his favorite plants found their new spots on the windowsills. As he placed the final touches on the room, he felt a sense of accomplishment. He could already imagine the quiet evenings, the peaceful nights, and the calm solitude this apartment promised. However, there was one catch. The apartment was shared, and his roommates were still nowhere to be found. The landlord had explained that they were out of town and would be back in a few days. Alex didn't mind. He was used to living alone, and the idea of having roommates didn't bother him. Besides, this place was so perfect that he hardly expected any issues. For the first few days, everything was ideal. Alex settled into a routine, enjoying the quiet mornings and relaxing evenings. He had all the space he needed, and the solitude was a welcome change. At night, the apartment became even more peaceful, the only sounds coming from the occasional hum of the refrigerator or the soft rustle of the wind outside. The apartment seemed to wrap itself around him like a warm blanket, and he felt like he had finally found his place in the world. But that calm didn't last long. On the fourth night, as Alex sat at his desk, working on an assignment for one of his classes, he began to notice something strange. It wasn't anything he could put his finger on at first, just an odd feeling like something was out of place. The air in the room grew heavier, colder, as though a chill had descended from nowhere. Alex glanced over his shoulder, but the room was as empty as ever. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just the effects of a long day and a bit of overthinking. Still, the feeling lingered. Every now and then, he would catch the sensation of being watched, as if eyes were silently observing his every move. It was subtle at first, a mere shiver down his spine that he could easily dismiss. But as the night wore on, the feeling grew stronger, more unsettling. The strange coldness in the room only deepened, and the quiet, which he had once cherished, began to feel oppressive, suffocating even. It wasn't just the temperature that felt off. The silence in the apartment became unnerving. He had always appreciated peace, but now it felt like a weight pressing on his chest. There were moments when the air felt too still, too thick, as if something was holding it in place. The usual comforting hum of the city outside, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, all seemed distant now, as though muffled by an invisible barrier. Suddenly there was a sound, a soft, distinct tapping noise. It was faint, like the sound of footsteps on hardwood, and it made Alex freeze in his seat. He looked around, but no one was there. The tapping grew louder, closer, as if someone was walking in the next room, yet there was no sign of movement anywhere. Alex's heart started to race, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. He stood up slowly, his gaze scanning the apartment once more. Nothing. There was no one in sight. The apartment was still as empty as it had been when he moved in. Trying to shake off the growing unease, Alex walked over to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. He needed something to calm his nerves, to remind himself that everything was fine, that he was just imagining things. But as he stepped into the hallway, the coldness seemed to intensify. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he could feel the distinct sensation of someone, or something, watching him. The apartment was eerily silent once more, but now Alex couldn't ignore the feeling. It wasn't just his imagination. Something was wrong. Just as he was about to turn back toward his room, the door creaked open. He hadn't expected anyone. His roommates weren't supposed to be back for a few more days. But standing in the doorway were two figures. Alex froze, unsure whether to speak or to run. They were both dressed in black, sleek, and elegant outfits that seemed almost out of place for a simple apartment. They didn't look like the kind of people Alex had imagined when he thought of roommates. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and had an air of quiet strength about him. He carried himself with an undeniable confidence, yet his eyes, Those sharp, intense eyes seemed to hold something darker, something unsettling. The woman was equally striking. She was slender and graceful, her presence almost ethereal, as though she didn't quite belong to this world. Her pale skin glowed under the dim light of the hallway, and her eyes, though equally sharp, seemed to gleam with a quiet intensity. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were not just strangers, but something else entirely. "Alex," the man said, his voice deep and calm, "I'm Rix, this is Nix, we're your roommates." Alex blinked in confusion. He hadn't been expecting them so soon. You're back early," he stammered. Rix nodded, his gaze never leaving Alex. "We had some things to take care of. You didn't mind the solitude, did you?" Alex hesitated, still unsure of what to make of the situation. "No, I wasn't expecting anyone yet." Nix stepped forward, her movements fluid and almost mesmerizing. She smiled, though it was not a warm smile. It was more of a knowing, calculating expression. "We understand. We've been searching for the perfect place for a long time, too." Alex tried to smile back, but the unease gnawed at him. There was something about them that didn't sit right. Something in the way they spoke, in the way they moved, that felt off. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees in an instant. It wasn't just the chill of the night anymore. It was something more. Alex's thoughts raced, trying to figure out what exactly was happening. Rix's gaze softened, almost as if he could sense Alex's discomfort. "Don't worry, Alex, we don't bite." Alex forced a chuckle, trying to play it off. I didn't think you would." But the words felt hollow, and deep down, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that his perfect sanctuary had just been shattered. The strange coldness in the air, the unsettling presence of his roommates, it all felt wrong. Something about this apartment wasn't right, and Alex had a sinking feeling that he was about to find out exactly why. The following days after Alex's unsettling introduction to Rix and Nix were nothing like he had imagined. At first, he tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that it was just his mind playing tricks on him after months of living in a solitary apartment. But no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the unease lingered, a quiet whisper in the back of his mind. Rix and Nix kept to themselves for the most part. They were rarely seen during the day, always staying in their rooms, which were on the opposite side of the apartment. Alex couldn't help but notice that they were often gone at night as well. The strange thing was, when they did emerge, it was always in the late hours, long after Alex had finished his studying or work for the day. They never seemed tired or sleepy, not like ordinary people who followed the typical day-night cycle. It was as though they didn't need the same kind of rest that Alex did. One evening, Alex decided to stay up late to catch up on some reading. It was a quiet night, the kind of night where the world outside seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds of the city were muffled, as if the streets themselves were still. As he sat by his desk, reading a textbook on biology, he glanced up to see Rix and Nix entering the living room. The light from the hallway illuminated their figures, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. Rix looked as calm and composed as ever, his presence as imposing as it had been when Alex first met him. Nix, on the other hand, seemed almost ethereal. She moved with an eerie grace, her pale skin glowing under the dim light, as though she didn't quite belong to this world. It was hard to explain, but something about her seemed otherworldly, as though she were not just a person but something more. "Alex," Rix said, his voice deep and measured, "we were wondering if you'd like to join us for a late-night drink." Alex felt a shiver run down his spine at the invitation. He didn't know why, but the offer made him uneasy. I'm fine," he replied, trying to sound casual. "I've got a lot of work to do." Nix, standing slightly behind Rix, fixed her gaze on him, her eyes glimmering in the low light. "You work too hard," she said, her voice soft, almost like a whisper. "You need to relax. It's not healthy to keep your mind busy all the time. You should let yourself unwind." Alex smiled nervously. "I'm just focused on my studies. I'll be done soon." But there was something about the way Nix said those words that felt strange. It was like she knew something Alex didn't, as if she was speaking from experience. It was a kind of familiarity that sent a cold shudder through him. He wanted to look away, but her eyes held him captive, drawn into their depths. Rix glanced at Nix, then back at Alex, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said with a small nod. "But remember, you're welcome to join us anytime. We won't bite, I promise." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut, and despite his best efforts to laugh it off, something inside him stirred uneasily. He didn't know what it was, but Rix's words felt heavy, laden with meaning. He couldn't shake the feeling that the invitation wasn't just casual, there was more to it. The next few days passed in a blur of studying, occasional meals with his roommates, and trying to ignore the strange atmosphere that had settled in the apartment. Rix and Nix rarely spoke about anything personal. They never mentioned their pasts, where they came from, or what they did during the day. But there were moments, like in the quiet of the apartment, or when they thought he wasn't looking, when Alex could sense that something wasn't quite right. The way they moved, the way they looked at him, it was as if they were waiting for something, or perhaps even expecting something. One night, curiosity got the better of Alex. He had been lying in bed, tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. The clock on his nightstand read 2:30 a.m. and the apartment was silent, too silent. It was as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. He heard a faint sound coming from the hallway, soft footsteps that echoed faintly across the floor. It was them, Rix and Nix. Unable to resist, Alex quietly slipped out of bed and crept toward the hallway. He moved silently, careful not to make a sound. As he reached the corner, he peeked around it just in time to see his roommates entering the living room. This time, Alex wasn't sure what to expect. He had been trying to dismiss his worries, telling himself that everything was normal, that Rix and Nix were just strange but harmless people. But now, with the silence of the apartment pressing in on him, he felt more uncertain than ever. He watched as Rix and Nix sat down at the small table in the living room, their conversation low and inaudible. The dim light from the lamp beside them cast long shadows, making their figures look almost ghostly. Alex's heart raced as he saw Rix pull out a small, dark vial from his pocket. It was the same vial Alex had seen them drinking from before. The liquid inside looked thick, almost black in the dim light. Nix smiled, a smile that seemed to send a chill through the room. "It's been a long day," she said softly, her voice almost melodic. "We need to keep our strength up." Alex's pulse quickened as he watched them drink from the vial. There was something deeply unsettling about the way they moved, the way they handled the liquid, as if it were something sacred to them. Rix's gaze flickered in his direction, and Alex quickly pulled back, retreating into the shadows. But his mind raced. What were they drinking? It certainly wasn't anything normal. And why did they need to drink it at night? What were they hiding from him? The next morning, Alex tried to act as though nothing had happened. But the strange occurrences weighed on his mind. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. He knew that Rix and Nix weren't ordinary roommates. They were hiding something dark and dangerous. And the more he thought about it, the more Alex began to feel that he wasn't just living with strange roommates. He was living with something far more dangerous. Days went by, and Alex found himself becoming more withdrawn. He had always been a bit of a loner, but now he felt like an outsider in his own home. Rix and Nix barely spoke to him during the day, but when night came, they would emerge again, always together, always in sync. They moved like shadows, their quiet footsteps barely making a sound as they glided through the apartment. Alex was beginning to feel the weight of their presence more than ever. They weren't just his roommates, they were something more, something he couldn't quite understand. One evening, as he was sitting at his desk, trying to focus on his work, a knock on his door interrupted him. Startled, he turned toward the sound, his heart racing in his chest. When he opened the door, he was met by Nix, standing in the hallway with a smile that was almost too perfect. "Alex," she said softly, her voice smooth and calming. "We've been waiting for you." The following days felt like a blur to Alex. Despite his growing concerns about Rix and Nix, he couldn't bring himself to leave. There was something about the apartment, something about the strange connection he felt with his roommates that kept him rooted to the spot. It wasn't just the fear that held him back. It was an odd sense of curiosity, an undeniable need to understand who they really were and what they were hiding. Rix and Nix, for their part, continued their odd behavior. They were always present at night, slipping in and out of the apartment with quiet precision. During the day, they remained hidden in their rooms, almost as if they were trying to avoid any interaction. Alex had become accustomed to their strange routines, but each night, he found himself more and more fascinated by them. One evening, Alex couldn't take it anymore. The silence in the apartment had grown deafening, and the tension between him and his roommates was unbearable. He had to know more. What was it that made them so different? What was in that strange liquid they drank every night? What was happening in this apartment that made it feel like a place he no longer recognized? He waited until the middle of the night when the apartment was silent, and the only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of leaves outside. His roommates had slipped into the living room again, and this time, Alex was determined to learn more. He crept down the hallway, moving slowly and silently, trying not to make a sound. As he reached the living room, he saw Rix and Nix sitting on the couch. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the room. Rix was leaning back, his posture relaxed, but there was something in his eyes that made Alex's heart race. Nix, on the other hand, was sitting perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the floor. It was a look of concentration, but her pale face seemed unnaturally serene, almost too calm for someone who was supposed to be human. Alex held his breath as he watched them. He had seen them drink from the vial before, but tonight was different. He could feel it in the air, the tension, the quiet anticipation of something about to unfold. Rix reached into his pocket and pulled out the familiar vial, its dark liquid shimmering in the low light. Alex's eyes widened and he instinctively took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. "Rix, do you ever wonder what it would be like?" Nix asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Rix turned his gaze toward her, his lips curling into a small smile. "What do you mean?" Nix's eyes flickered to Alex, and for a moment Alex felt a chill run down his spine. "I mean, do you ever wonder what it would be like to stop pretending, to let go of the facade and just live freely without the need to hide who we are?" Rix was silent for a moment, and Alex could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. He didn't know what to make of it. He had never heard either of them speak like this before. There was something so raw, so vulnerable about Nix's words, and it left Alex feeling even more confused than ever. "I've thought about it," Rix said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "But we can't afford that luxury. Not yet. There's too much at stake." At this, Nix smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was more of a knowing, almost bitter smile. "I suppose you're right, but sometimes I wonder, do we even have a choice anymore?" Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. He was too close to the truth now. They were hiding something. He had to know more. His curiosity got the best of him, and without thinking he stepped into the room, his presence drawing the attention of both Rix and Nix. They turned to look at him, their eyes narrowing slightly, but neither said a word. "What are you talking about?" Alex asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "What do you mean, stop pretending?" For a moment there was only silence. Then Rix sighed, leaning forward, his gaze fixed on Alex with an intensity that made him shiver. "It's complicated, Alex. We've been living in the shadows for a long time. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Alex said, his voice more confident than he felt. He wasn't sure why he pressed the issue, but there was something about the way Rix spoke that made him desperate to know the truth. Nix stood up slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She walked over to Alex, her eyes never leaving his. "We're not like you, Alex," she said softly. "We didn't come here by choice. We've been sent here for a reason." Alex took a step back, his heart racing. "What do you mean, who sent you?" Rix stood up as well, his tall form casting a long shadow across the room. "We're not from Earth," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that Alex could feel deep in his chest. "We're from a planet far beyond your understanding. We're different, and we've been sent here to find something that could change everything." Alex blinked, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "You're from another planet," he repeated, as if saying the words out loud might help him make sense of them. "Yes," Nix replied, her voice low. "We're not human, we're not even close, but we've learned to blend in to survive here, and we need to keep our identities a secret. The vial you've seen us drinking from, it's what helps us survive in this atmosphere. Without it, we wouldn't last long." Alex's head spun. "But why me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want from me?" Rix's gaze softened, but there was still an intensity behind his eyes. "We need your help, Alex. You're the only one who can help us now." Before Alex could respond, Nix stepped closer, her voice a whisper in his ear. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you? But you will. Soon enough, you will." The air in the room grew thicker, colder, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. Alex's heart raced in his chest, and his mind struggled to process everything. What had he gotten himself into? Who were these people, and why had they chosen him? Why me? He repeated, his voice shaky. Rix and Nix exchanged a glance before Rix spoke again. Because, Alex, you're more than you think. And your role in this is just beginning. Alex sat there in stunned silence, the weight of Rix's words pressing down on him like a physical force. His mind raced, trying to grasp what had just been revealed. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary person, nothing special, just a student trying to get through life. But now, it seemed like he had been caught up in something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The truth hit him hard. His roommates weren't just strange. They were alien beings living among humans for a reason they had yet to fully explain. And what was worse, they were asking for his help. But help with what? What could someone like him possibly offer to beings from another planet? His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process everything. Nix's calm, almost eerie demeanor and Rix's quiet intensity had left him shaken. The coldness in the air had become unbearable, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was even breathing properly. It felt like the walls of the apartment were closing in on him, the reality of the situation too much to handle. Why me? Alex finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't know why he asked the question again. Maybe it was because he still couldn't believe it, or maybe it was because he desperately needed to understand why he had been pulled into this strange, terrifying world. Rix's expression softened, but there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation in his eyes. You're not just an ordinary human, Alex. You have a potential, something we need. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean, what potential? Nix stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful, like a shadow gliding across the floor. You don't realize it yet, but you're connected to something much greater than yourself. You've been chosen, Alex. Chosen because of your ability to tap into something beyond human understanding. Alex looked at her, confusion swirling in his mind. I don't understand, he said, his voice shaky. I'm just a student, I'm not special. Rix and Nix exchanged a glance, one that spoke volumes. It was clear that they had known this would be difficult for Alex to grasp, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. Rix took a deep breath, as if weighing his words carefully before speaking again. We're not the only ones here, Alex, Rix said slowly. There are others like us, and they're watching us. They know we're here and they'll stop at nothing to prevent us from achieving our mission. Alex's eyes widened, his heart beginning to race again. What mission? What are you trying to do? Nix's eyes glittered in the dim light, her gaze intense. We need to find the artifact, she said softly. The one that can change everything. It's hidden somewhere on this planet and we've been searching for it for a long time, but we can't do it alone. We need you, Alex. Alex shook his head, feeling overwhelmed. I don't know anything about an artifact. I'm not the one you're looking for. But Nix didn't look away. You are, Alex. You've always been the one we needed. You've just never realized it. Rick stepped closer, his voice calm yet firm. This is bigger than just us, Alex. The fate of not only Earth but countless other worlds depends on what happens next, and we can't do it without your help. Alex felt a sense of dread wash over him. He had never signed up for any of this. All he wanted was to live a normal life, to finish his studies and maybe find a job after graduation. But now he was caught in a whirlwind of mystery and danger, and it seemed like there was no way out. I don't know how I can help, he said, his voice trembling. I'm just a student, I'm not some hero or anything. Rix and Nix exchanged a look, and for a moment Alex saw something in their eyes, something like pity but also something deeper, something almost sad. You may not see it now, Alex, Nix said softly, but you have more power than you know. Your connection to the artifact, to the force that binds us all, is something only you can access. We've been searching for you for a long time, waiting for the right moment. Alex felt a surge of panic. I don't want any part of this, he said, his voice rising. I don't want to be involved in whatever this is, I just want to live my life. But Rick shook his head slowly. You already are involved, Alex. You've been chosen for a reason. And whether you want to or not, you're part of something much bigger than you can imagine. For the first time since meeting them, Alex saw a flicker of something more human in Rix's eyes, something that almost resembled empathy. I know this is a lot to take in, he said gently. But there's no turning back now. We need your help, Alex. And if you refuse, there's a good chance the forces we're up against will find you anyway. You can't escape this, not now, not after everything that's happened. Alex felt the weight of Rix's words settle deep in his chest. He had no idea what kind of forces Rix was talking about, But the way Rick spoke made it clear that whatever was coming, it wasn't something he could avoid. It wasn't something anyone could avoid. A part of Alex wanted to run, to pack his things and leave. But another part of him, a part he didn't fully understand, felt drawn to the mystery. Why had they come to him? Why had they chosen him? "What happens if I help you?" Alex asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What do I have to do?" Nix smiled, a small, almost reassuring smile. "You won't be alone in this, Alex. We'll guide you, but you have to trust us. You have to believe in what we're telling you." Alex hesitated, looking between Rix and Nix, their eyes filled with an intensity that made it impossible to turn away. His mind raced, torn between fear and curiosity, between the desire for a normal life and the pull of something much bigger than himself. "What's the artifact?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Rix took a deep breath, his eyes darkening. "It's an ancient object, one that holds unimaginable power. It has the ability to change the course of history. But it's also dangerous, too dangerous for anyone to possess. That's why we have to find it first, before the wrong people get their hands on it." Alex's mind spun. He didn't fully understand everything, but he could feel the gravity of the situation. He could sense that this wasn't just some fantasy or conspiracy, it was real, and it was happening right now, in the apartment he thought was his safe place. "How do I help?" Alex asked quietly, his voice shaking with both fear and resolve. Rix's gaze softened slightly. "We'll show you," he said, "but be ready, Alex, this won't be easy, and it won't be quick." Alex nodded slowly, his heart still pounding in his chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he muttered, mostly to himself. "You will be," Nix said gently. "You have no choice now." The journey has already begun. The days that followed were some of the most confusing and frightening of Alex's life. He had agreed to help Rix and Nix, but the reality of what he was involved in was starting to hit him. He had no idea what the artifact was, how it worked, or why he had been chosen to help find it. All he knew for sure was that his once quiet life was gone, replaced by something that felt like a never-ending whirlwind of secrets, danger, and uncertainty. Rix and Nix didn't waste time. They began preparing Alex for the journey ahead, but the more they told him, the more questions he had. They spoke in vague terms, explaining that they needed to find the artifact before it fell into the wrong hands. But who were the wrong hands? What did they want with the artifact? They wouldn't say, only telling Alex that the forces they were up against were far beyond his understanding. Despite the constant questions swirling in his mind, Alex was beginning to feel something else, an almost unbearable pull toward the mission. It wasn't just the sense of danger that had settled in his chest, or the fear that something terrible would happen if they didn't succeed. There was something inside of him, something he couldn't explain, that made him want to continue, to follow them deeper into this world he had never known. One night, after they had finished discussing their plans, Alex found himself standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but it all felt so distant, so far removed from the reality he had come to know. It was hard to believe that just weeks ago he had been an ordinary student living a simple life. Now he was caught up in something much larger than himself. "You're thinking too much," Nix said quietly, stepping up beside him. Her presence was almost unsettling in the way it seemed to fill the space around her, but there was also something comforting about it. Alex turned to face her, unsure of what to say. "I don't know what's happening, Nix," he admitted. "I don't know how to do this." Nix studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. "You're stronger than you think," she said simply. "We've seen it before. You're more connected to this than you realize. Trust yourself." It was a strange thing to hear coming from someone like her. She didn't seem human, not in the way Alex understood humans to be. But there was something in her words, something that made Alex feel as if he were truly a part of this journey, even though he didn't fully understand it yet. Rix entered the room, his face set in its usual stoic expression. "It's time," he said. "We leave tomorrow." Alex nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought. He hadn't known what to expect when he agreed to help, but now that the moment was finally here, he wasn't sure if he was ready. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped him. "The artifact is hidden," Rix explained. "But we have a lead. It's not far, but the journey will be dangerous. There are others who seek the artifact, and they won't let us get close without a fight." Alex felt a lump form in his throat. "Who are these people? What do they want with it?" Rix didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave Alex a long, measured look. They're like us, but different. They want the artifact for their own purposes. They don't care about the consequences, only the power it holds. The weight of Rix's words sank in. Power, that was what this was all about. The artifact, whatever it was, held the potential to change everything. And now it seemed like Alex's role in this was to help stop it from falling into the wrong hands. "You're ready, Alex," Nix said quietly, as if sensing his anxiety. "You have no choice now. The path has already been set, but we'll be with you every step of the way." Her words were meant to reassure him, but they only made him feel more exposed. What had he gotten himself into? How could he possibly help them find this artifact when he didn't even understand what it was? The next morning, after a restless night of sleep, they set out. The journey was long and full of obstacles. As they traveled, Rix and Nix filled Alex in on the details they had kept from him before. They explained that the artifact had been hidden away centuries ago by a group of ancient beings who had recognized its potential to change the balance of the universe. But not everyone had agreed that the artifact should remain hidden. Over the years, there had been numerous attempts to retrieve it, but the artifact had always been protected by powerful forces, which was why it had remained elusive. Now Alex and his roommates were part of the latest attempt, and they were determined to succeed where others had failed. Along the way, Alex found himself learning more about his companions. Despite their strange origins, Rix and Nix were surprisingly patient with him. They answered his questions as best as they could, though they still kept many details to themselves. Alex understood that they were trying to protect him, but it only made him feel more like an outsider. One night, as they set up camp, Alex couldn't sleep. The sounds of the forest outside were strange, and the stars above seemed impossibly far away. He found himself thinking about his life before all of this, before Rix and Nix had shown up, before he had agreed to help them. It seemed like a lifetime ago, and the idea of returning to that life now seemed impossible. The crackling of a nearby fire broke Alex out of his thoughts. He glanced over and saw Rix and Nix sitting by the flames, talking in low voices. Alex stood up and walked over, unsure of what to say. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked quietly, sitting down beside them. Rix glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "We've lived many lives, Alex," he said slowly. "Our pasts are behind us now. What matters is what we do next." Nix looked at him with a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You'll understand soon enough," she said softly. Alex didn't respond, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the more he learned, the less he understood. He had always thought of himself as someone in control of his own life, someone who could make his own choices. But now, it felt like everything was being decided for him. He wasn't sure if he could handle it, if he was strong enough to face what was coming. As the days passed, the journey grew more intense. The landscape changed as they moved farther from the safety of the city. The dangers they faced grew more real, and Alex found himself more and more unsure of his place in all of this. The stakes were higher than he could have imagined, and every decision felt like it could mean life or death. But despite his fear and uncertainty, there was a part of him that knew he couldn't turn back. He had made a choice, and now he had to see it through. For better or worse, Alex was in this for the long haul. The night before they reached their destination, Alex stood outside their camp, staring up at the stars. There was no turning back now. The artifact was close, and with it, the power to change everything. Alex had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to face it alone.